So the topic today is T.S. Eliot's theory of poetry. I will be mainly focusing on his essays, critical essays that were published in The Sacred Wood and other journals. I shall also be talking of his poetical works with reference to his theory of poetry. My main area of discussion shall be T.S. Eliot's essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, The Metaphysical Poets, Hamlet and His Problems, Poet, Critic, Critic, Poet. And the primary text that I have taken from T.S. Eliot to substantiate the theories of T.S. Eliot, of course, the poems that are prescribed for our study. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Preludes, a little bit of The Wasteland, Holloman, Geruntion. T.S. Eliot's works belong to a tradition. We can call this tradition as an European American tradition. So starting from his Howard years, where he took his BA degree, MA degree, and later on pursued his PhD. So from the Harvard University campus, he started his career as a poet, came in close association with the poets of the generation, and started building up a new school of thought and poetic theory. We all regard T.S. Eliot primarily as a formalist, as a critic who has been called modernist in sensibility, as a poet who is the most important influence on modernism, on the making of modernism. And perhaps T.S. Eliot is the most influential critics of the entire period of modernism, or even the entire 20th century, and perhaps the most influential poet in English, writing in English, who has influenced the poetry of the entire world. So his position as a critic, as a theorist, as a poet, all should be taken into account if we want to understand his poetical works. To make difficult things easier, I would just try to refer to his biography. So he is a poet critic. By poet critic, I mean a person who is practicing both as a poet as well as critic. Therefore, as a poet critic, T.S. Eliot belongs to the great tradition of poet critics like Dr. Samuel Johnson, like Matthew Arnold, or say even Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Among the influences on T.S. Eliot, we must take into account the French writers, like the poets who were appreciated by Arthur Symons in the book called The Symbolist Movement in Poetry. So he was influenced by the works of Henry Burgesson, Arthur Symons, the philosophy of George Santayana, Irving Babbitt, the works of F.H. Bradley, and the poetry of the French school, especially the symbolist poets like Laforge, Baudelaire. And then we have to work out his development as an artist. T.S. Eliot is perhaps a writer who will be breaking grounds, writing against the stream, and yet he will be talking about the great tradition of Europe. But it is a pick and choice. So he will be very selective in his choice. Either he will go back to the late Elizabethan period or go back to the Jacobean period to search for his muse, or he would be simply moving in the Elysian fields of American poetry, the Imagist poetry of Ezra Pound and others, or in the symbolic field of French poetry. So these are the sources. In the book called The Tradition and Individual Talent, Eliot will be talking about the poet who will be writing, keeping in mind the mind of Europe. So his theory of poetry is structuralist. Since Aristotle, formalism, structuralism, and the classification of poetry has gradually developed or taken shape. So through the works of the neoclassical critics, even Renaissance critics like Philip Sidney, neoclassical critics like John Dryden, Alexander Pope, Addison, Dr. Samuel Johnson, even the romantic critics and theorists like Wordsworth, Coleridge. We have the evolution of T.S. Eliot in the great English tradition. But he is, again I say, a poet who will be breaking ground by selecting, picking and choosing those writers whom he thinks fall in his theory of poetry. So he will not be devising a new theory of poetry. Rather, he will be elucidating the theory of poetry of certain poets selected by him, and then he will be developing his own theory of poetry and contributing a lot to this modernist genre of poetry. So he was influenced by the works of Baudelaire, Rimbaud, Julius Laforge, especially in his use of irony and symbolism. So he is a poet of dramatic irony, a poet of symbolism, imagery. So he kept on training himself from his earlier life in the Harvard University, training himself, modernizing himself on his own. So he was primarily modernizing the verbal technique of poetry. So by poetry, we mean an imitation of life in a metrical form. While Wordsworth said that, yes, it is possible that a poetry can be written in a language really used by men. Coleridge was there to say against Wordsworth that the essential difference between the language of poetry and the language of prose is the meter. And it is because of the metrical variations, metrical arrangement, poetry is possible. So T.S. Eliot will be playing with the works of Wordsworth and Coleridge, the entire Romantic poets, in his search for versification. So his verbal technique is a modification upon the existing writers, and he is taking the rhythm that is very contemporary, very modernist. So there is a blend, a kind of fusion between the old and the new. And in search for that, he will be moving very close to a verse technique that captures the rhythms of a jazz music. At Harvard, Eliot always focused on the writings of the philosophers. Even in for his PhD course, he was working on F.H. Bradley's work, Appearance and Reality. So on the contextual level, his modernism is trying to revive the tradition of Plato. So on the formal level, he is Aristotelian. On the contextual level, he is Platonic. So this unique bend of the Platonic philosophy that comes through the works of T.S. Eliot, where appearance and reality and the shadow line in between form the crux of his work. Ezra Pound, the great advisor, mentor of T.S. Eliot, also an editor and a promoter of T.S. Eliot, who also served as a literary agent to T.S. Eliot, actually paved the ground for this fusion of the contemporary spirit of modernist poetry and theory with the works of the classical philosophers, the modern philosophers, with the works of the European poets and the English traditional poets. In his choice of poetry, he will be going back to the metaphysical poets. So this metaphysical poet, that essay, is particularly written to re-establish or bring to the center stage of poetry the metaphysical poets like John Donne and Marvell. And by researching on the works of the late Elizabethan dramatists as well as the Jacobean dramatist, T.S. Eliot will be finding the proper way of representing thought and emotion, intellect and feeling, while making these two together, brought together through a rich texture of imagery and symbology. So this is T.S. Eliot, who is working on the pattern of poetry that was there existing in the works of poets like John Webster or John Donne or Andrew Marvell. For T.S. Eliot, no artist produces great art by a deliberate attempt to express his personality. Especially after his marriage, the broken marriage with Vivian, T.S. Eliot was much depressed. And in his early poems, he was trying to express, in terms of subjectivity, the spontaneous emotion. We remember William Wordsworth had defined poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. That, of course, takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. T.S. Eliot, at that time, at point of his literary career, recognized that this spontaneous expression of powerful feeling cannot make poetry a form that will contain a very serious content. So for him, no artist can produce great art by deliberate attempt to express his personality. So we have mainly three proper views of poetry. One, the expression of artist, that means the spontaneous feeling, emotion of the artist expressed through poetry. The other is poetry as a mirror to life, where the poet is quite objective, merely making an imitation of life, as Aristotle has stated that poetry is an imitation of an action. While talking about tragedy, he said it is serious action that is imitated. The third is that in poetry, apart from the imitation of action, the world is presented in a very objective manner, like a slice of life reality. So the theory of poetry must take into account three main things: either the world, or the artist, or the entire process of creativity. So we have the artist at the center stage in case of the romantic poet, and we have the society in the center stage in case of the classical poets, the writers who are representing the society as it is. And we have also a kind of blending path in between, where the personality of the self is blended very closely with the world outside, trying to negotiate or bridge the gap between the real world and the world within the self. While romanticism has been defined as interiorization of the external world, through the mind of the poet, the world will be seen. So a poet like William Blake will talk about the infinite possibility of a poet's imagination to see the world in a grain of sand, or to hold infinity in the palm of hand. So poet is seen as a person seer blessed, with a better knowledge of the world, with a prophetic power, and with an insight, as Wordsworth has stated, to be able to throw life into things that are otherwise fixed and dead. So this has to be very spontaneous, very personal, emotional. And for T.S. Eliot, writing against this trend of poetry, no artist can produce great art by a deliberate attempt to express his personality. Therefore, for T.S. Eliot, Wordsworth's line like, "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky," or "There was a time when meadows, birds, and grove, the stream and every common sight to me did seem, apparel in celestial light, the glory and freshness of a dream," are all instances of personal poetry where the poet is not able to connect the self with the world, or the world with the self in an objective manner. So with this view, T.S. Eliot will be publishing his first volume of poetry, Prufrock and Other Observations, in 1917. Later on, he will be developing his same concept of poetry, where objectivity is the criteria and the emotional representation of the self is thrown in the garbage. So T.S. Eliot is working like a scientist poet. One aspect of modernism or modernist poetry is that there will be a tendency in the poet to look at art in a very conscious manner, self-conscious, fullness, not at the self, but at the object of art. Gerontian, Holloman, all these poems, they include a kind of dramatic monologue technique in order to represent the world objectively. But at the center stage of Eliot's poem, we do not find a fully developed individual consciousness or character, but rather we have a kind of consciousness that dominates through the speeches, utterances, half utterances, forming a kind of structure of emotion. And these are all set in particular situation. Eliot's theory of poetry therefore focuses on the objectivity of the situation and poet's analysis of the situation in a critical manner, with irony and sarcasm working as the main devices. I use the word device very consciously because for Eliot, poetry is an artifice. It's naturally not possible to write poetry. Rather, poetry is craftsmanship. It's a device. So it is like inventing an engine. So a poet is like an inventor of an engine, like say James Watt inventing the steam engine. So this engine that is invented by the poet will not have any kind of imprint of the inventor. So if you look at a bubble and you look at the bubble and try to recognize who is this bubble blower, you will find that there is a separation between the bubble blower and the bubble. So T.S. Eliot's theory of poetry is such that, like a bubble blower, as D.H. Lawrence has stated, the poet will be blowing a bubble, keeping the poet outside the bubble. Neither the form nor the content will have any kind of imprint of the poet, the personality of the poet. So most of his critical works on poetry deal with this strict objectivity, a scientific precision, whereon to present the text as something that is totally separated from the author. That means he is talking about something that presupposes the death of the author through the act of textuality. So everything has to be in the text, and this textual reading should not be based on any kind of biographical reading. So at that time, when after the separation with Vivien, the problems with Vivien, so he was suffering from emotional trauma, and such traumatic experience of T.S. Eliot were coming into his work of art, and he tried to consciously separate himself, his personality, his emotion, his personal life from the text. Even Coleridge talks about this in Biographia Literaria, where he is trying to resolve this problem of the unity between the artist and the work of art, and he's talking about symbology as a mode of escape. So association, reflection, assimilation, representation to dissolve, diffuse, dissipate. But once the poetry is created, it will be recreated as something fresh, where we have a separation. So the world of Kubla Khan, say Kubla as a character, is separated from the artist. Even the artist who is saying that I will build a dome in air is not recognizably the poet himself, because there is a critical, ironical view even of the artist, the poet, who is creating poetry. So T.S. Eliot, with this view, perhaps wrote the best poem of the entire century, The Waste Land, that has remained most influential work of the 20th century in the field of poetry. The Waste Land was described by Eliot as, I repeat, I quote, a jumble of good and bad passages into a poem. Interesting definition. A jumble of good and bad passages in a poem. So this also reflects upon the theory of poetry that T.S. Eliot is talking about. So a fragment. In Kubla Khan, we have the subtitle, A Fragment. So it is regarded as a poem about poetic process. And in case of The Waste Land, also T.S. Eliot has this in mind, that poetry is a mixture of, a jumble of good and bad passages that are all combined into a poem. So if we look at this simple definition of poetry as a combination of good and bad passages into a poem, we find that even Wasteland, we have the sterility of modern world ravaged by the horrors of World War I, First World War. So that waste and sterility of a modern Western world that has been ravaged by the First World War, presented in an objective manner with the images that are drawn from various metropolitan locations. T.S. Eliot is talking about this metropolitan location as the geopolitical location of his poetry. Therefore, his theory of poetry will also be based on this geopolitical metropolitan location. You remember that this geopolitical metropolitan location is also, during T.S. Eliot's time, the imperial center of the world. As Raymond Williams has defined metropolis, modern metropolis, as a conglomeration of the entire world into a particular structure in the form of metropolis. So different forms come into the metropolis. Artistic forms, poetic forms, all come together in the modern metropolis. In tradition and in the individual talent, T.S. Eliot is talking about this coming of the sources from the roots, from the locations that are far away from the metropolitan location. But once these are coming into the metropolitan location, the poets have a preference to accept this because of the novelty, because of the avant-gardist, anti-tradition viewpoint. And the entire development of modernist art is based on this challenge. We know that there are various movements that gradually shaped the concept of modernism. The old school of realism got replaced by first naturalism, then came new naturalism, impressionism, new impressionism, then came symbolism. After symbolism, we have Expressionism, Dadaism, Fabiism, then we have Surrealism, Abstractism. So all these are contributing to the making of the modernist art. When the form of poetry or form of representational art was taken away by the invention of, say, photographic camera or the invention of the film, the form of realism that was talking about representing the world as it is got replaced by a kind of new reflection on reality, representable through art forms. So this type of representation through art forms in the modernist art will be also influencing the theory of literature, theory of poetry. Aristotle's old school of imitation or mimesis as the center of poetic creativity will now be replaced by alternative mimetic modes. By alternative mimetic modes, I mean the object of imitation almost remains the same. The world, the character, these are the objects of imitation. The medium of imitation, the verbal medium, the poetic medium remains the same. But the method or the manner of imitation will definitely undergo change because of the photographic realism that has already swept across literary arts. And we have this mechanical reproduction through such photographic arts that poetry should be encountered with. And when poetry comes in close encounter with the realism that was introduced by photography, or the realism that was mainly surface realism or even three-dimensional realism that we have in forms of sculpture making, poetry is now being challenged with the nature and scope of verbal imitation. So this verbal imitation will not only be descriptive in nature, it has to break the boundaries of such description and has to accommodate the rhythm and pulse of the contemporary life in a form that is very close to the people. Wordsworth also talked about this type of language. He said in preface to Lyrical Ballads that he will be writing in a language really used by men. So he is talking about incidents and situations that will be drawn from common life and should be presented in a language really used by men. If you closely read the poem J. Alfred Prufrock, you will find that yes, T.S. Eliot is an admirer of William Wordsworth because the vocabulary of ordinary conversation, the language really used by men, human beings, these are all used in Eliot's poems like J. Alfred Prufrock or The Wasteland. Yet in this imitation of the language of real life, there has been some kind of transformation. He's also choosing the incidents and situations from common life. Yet in the representation or the formal shape, this type of representation undergoes a sea change. Here the rhythm of the contemporary life will be taken into account, and T.S. Eliot will be responding to a new world, to a new metropolitan world that has now got the new sounds of life. So in The Wasteland, we will have the sound of fit, 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 jug, 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 jug. Oh, the Shakespearean rag, the sounds that are essentially cataphonic, the sounds that are essentially consonantal, metallic sounds that are possible only in the urban location. So these sounds capture the auditory world of T.S. Eliot, and his representation of such organic images must require a new form of artistic imitation, a new form of poetry. So he also published the works of Proust and Cocteau. So the works of Proust and Cocteau influenced T.S. Eliot in his conception. We remember that while commenting on the works of Proust, James Joyce once noted, "Here form is content and content form." I repeat, on the works of Marcel Proust, James Joyce once commented that here form is content, content form. The entire formalism or modernist poetry will therefore depend on this theoretical assumption that here form will be content and content will be form. There will be a combination, a monism between form and content. There will be no dualism or separation between form and content. So Eliot's theory of poetry will try to locate the possibility of the blending of form and content. The entire metaphysical poet, that particular essay, deals with this possibility of association of sensibility. So if you want to blend thought with intellect, or if you want to relate the mind of the poet with the emotion of the poet, if you want to relate feelings with intellect or with thought, emotion with feelings or thought, you need a kind of sensibility that is unified. This unified sensibility, according to T.S. Eliot, can be seen in the works of writers who were intellectually writing poetry. By intellectually writing poetry, T.S. Eliot perhaps meant writers who are fully conscious of the artifice of poetry. Poetry is not a kind of simple, spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. And he says that even adolescent poetry that is full of emotional outpouring and spontaneity can never be regarded as good poetry. Now, T.S. Eliot, in his famous essay on poetry, says that it is easy to define what poetry is. It is easier to define what is a function of poetry. It is easier to define what is a poet or who is a poet. But it is very difficult to appreciate which poem is a good poem. So we have no proper definition to define good poem. We can appreciate poem on the basis of certain features, but it is very difficult to judge whether the poem is good or bad. So this judgment regarding poem will depend on a critique of fundamental understanding, critique of fundamental judgmental understanding of the poetic form as well as content. For T.S. Eliot, it is the unified sensibility that can make a poem good or a poem bad. So he said that the romantic poets like Wordsworth, they only felt, they only expressed their emotions. My heart leaps up when I behold, or looking at the daffodils, my heart dances with the daffodils, or looking at a solitary girl, the poet will simply respond, behold her single in the field, you solitary highland lass, reaping and singing by herself. Stop here or gently pass. There will be a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion without any kind of intellectual mediation and conversion of that thought into an objective poetic expression. Cleon Brooks, a follower of T.S. Eliot, in his famous essay, The Unwrought Urn, will talk about this structure of poetry. He says in his famous essay, Heresy of Paraphrase, that if you break the structure of the poem, if you paraphrase a poem, the poem will be lost. The content will be lost. T.S. Eliot perhaps had the same theoretical position where he is trying to talk about the correlationship between form and content. Without the form, content is not possible, and the content will appropriate with the form. Therefore, this structuration can be seen in his plays too, where the language has been defined by T.S. Eliot of three types. In case of his poetic drama, he calls his plays poetic dramas. He said that there are three forms of languages that one can use in case of poetic drama. First language is the language of ordinary conversation, conversational language. That is the prose language. The second is the language of verse, that is metrically arranged, having some kind of rhyme, rhythm. The third is the poetic language. Now, if we try to understand the difference between these three types of languages, we have to come to an understanding of Eliot's view of poetry. So poetry is a mimesis of the rhythms of language. So the voices, these are captured. These voices can be prosaic, these voices can be versified voices, and these voices can be poetical voices. When we have the consciousness at the center of a poem like J. Alfred Prufrock, we have the blending of so many voices. And the voices are, of course, related to the metropolitan locations. And such voices are all kept in a kind of montage, brought together in a dramatic monologue. The poem, therefore, has the rhythm of the natural rhythm of the metropolitan life. In his work, Use of Poetry and Use of Criticism, T.S. Eliot, it's a late essay, a very mature essay, 1933. T.S. Eliot talks about criticism as a critical judgment, very objective, and poetry as a critical poetry that is again very objective. So poetry has to be critically objective, trying to find out the fundamental position and then relate that world or the society or individual in a set of situation, so that the entire story becomes something like a bubble blown by a artist, a text that is totally removed from the artist. So the artist will create the text not by participating in it in an emotional manner, but rather in an intellectual manner. He will be producing a text. In tradition and the individual talent, he will be therefore using the famous metaphor, famous trope of platinum. Poet's mind is like a shred of platinum. So what is this shred of platinum doing? In case of scientific experiment or chemical reaction, platinum acts as a catalyst for the combination of two elements. This element, platinum, is used as a catalyst. So when the entire process of chemical change goes on, platinum remains only as a catalyst, inert, without undergoing any kind of change. So this scientific trope of platinum to define what poetry is at the center stage of Eliot's impersonal theory of poetry, or the objective theory of poetry. So in 1919 essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, he will be talking more of this impersonal theory of poetry. Poet is defined as a person who is a learned person, who is an artistic person, who has the ability to respond to the voices and the sounds of the contemporary location, and to understand the society with a critical view. So critical thinking is an integral part of Eliot's poetic world. And this critical thinking will be presented through an ironic view of life, with the use of paradox, irony, sarcasm. And this will be catalyzed through the intellectual process of the artist with the help of metaphors, with the help of tropes. Say, for example, the opening lines of the poem J. Alfred Prufrock. J. Alfred Prufrock almost replicates the prosaic rhythm. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread against the sky, like a patient etherized on a table. So apparently it resembles an ordinary conversational language, as if a person is asking a companion to accompany him through a street walk. So the prosaic rhythm is possible in T.S. Eliot's work, but here we have a conscious manipulation of sound and structure, the rhythmic arrangement of sound and structure. T.S. Eliot regarded tradition as something that is set. Say, for example, the tradition of poetry. So by poetry we understand imitation that is metrical, rhythmic, that has enough symbology and ability to represent, with the help of poetic license, the world through the eyes of the poet. So this is poetry in the traditional definition of poetry. So since Aristotle's time, we have poets composing poems that are based on these fundamentals of poetry. So these are called tradition. Re-evaluation of Eliot's theory of poetry should also take into account this question of tradition. Tradition for T.S. Eliot was a simultaneous order, means something that never dies. It keeps on developing, a simultaneous order. So the tradition might be different traditions might be there, but all traditions grow together, develop together, and there is some kind of diachronic development of tradition. So by diachronic, I mean historical development of tradition. So from the past to the present, there is a continuity of tradition. But T.S. Eliot is also talking about the synchronic use of tradition in the contemporary. So he is using individual talent as a trope of this synchronic variation that we find in the tradition. So the poet, when they are using the traditional formats of poetry, they're also innovating upon that, adding, subtracting, deleting, or associating, mixing. So these individual traits that are therefore introduced by the poet, they belong to individual talent of the poet. So there is a simultaneous order of tradition that produces a kind of living whole, a kind of ideal order. Ideal order also refers to the mind of, say, all the poets of the world thinking together, writing together, that type of wholeness, moving towards an ideal order. And of course, he uses a phrase called mind of Europe. Now, this question of mind of Europe is actually should be taken with a pinch of salt. We should not accept this mind of Europe. This is, of course, more Eurocentric, of course, Androcentric. This mind of Europe is, of course, racial, racist. This mind of Europe is cultural, but it is based on Western culture, Christianity, Anglo-Catholic. So this concept of mind of Europe negates or relegates the mind of America, the mind of East, mind of non-West to the margins. T.S. Eliot in Tradition and Individual Talent talks about the margins also. He says that the great tradition of Europe has been accommodating the traditions that are drawn from non-Western societies. Say the cave paintings of past, they have been influencing the modern paintings. Picasso's paintings, say Cubism or Surrealism, Dadaism, Fabism, all these are influenced by the works of the Eastern writers, thinkers. So he is talking about this. But where is the mind of Europe in the concept of this tradition? Perhaps T.S. Eliot was talking about the Western mind, the Western tradition. So we regard this as parochial, narrow-minded, absolutely focused on the Anglophonic literary cultures. In the metaphysical poets, when he is talking about the theoretical position, he is taking into account not the poets outside the Eurocentric tradition. And even within the English tradition, he is taking the writers who are more or less influenced by the great English tradition of poetry, not the tradition of the Roman or the Greek school of poetry, but rather the English poets who are influenced by the English tradition rather than the European tradition as a whole. So he's talking about dissociation of sensibility in the works of poets like William Wordsworth, romantic poets, and he said that these romantic poets only had this emotional spontaneity. They only had feelings and emotions that they expressed through the work of art. On the other hand, we have a group of poets like the neoclassical poets, Alexander Pope, John Dryden, for whom it was only witty intellectual exercise. So he differentiates the poetry of Wordsworth and the poetry of the neoclassical school on the basis of the concept of sensibility, unified sensibility, and dissociation of sensibility. In the essay Metaphysical Poets, he's talking about this theoretical position where the poet's mind will work as a catalyst capable of combining intellect and emotion, capable of combining the thought with feeling, and thereby producing a kind of unified sensibility where the mind of the poet will remain a catalyst, an inert catalyst without affecting any kind of change or leaving any kind of imprint in the work of art. So in Hamlet and other observations, he will be developing this idea of poetry and will be producing the theory of objective correlative. So there should be a separation between the artist and the work of art, and this is possible only through the act of objective correlative. That means correlation will be drawn among the incident, situation, character, and they will be developed in such a logical, comprehensive, holistic manner so as to have no trace of the artist producing the work of art present there. While looking at Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, he found that emotions are in excess, unexplained, undefined, illogical, not related to this objective correlative of incident, situation, theme, character. So emotion outpouring is excess, and he comes to the conclusion in his essay on Hamlet that Shakespeare was spontaneously responding to the character of Hamlet, allowing Hamlet to speak a lot, express his emotion in such a way so as the objectivity of the text is destroyed because other characters are denied their voice. So we hear more about Hamlet through Hamlet rather than other characters. Other characters are not objectified in the work of art. So he regarded Hamlet as an artistic failure because, according to T.S. Eliot, in his early age, he wrote this essay that this work of art lacks objectivity. So at the core of T.S. Eliot's theory of poetry, we have the interrelationship between tradition and objectivity.